In the marble corridors of Astoria Palace, where every whisper could topple a throne and every glance held the weight of a kingdom, three women stood at the center of a storm that would reshape a monarchy forever. What began as a simple royal engagement announcement would unravel decades of hidden resentments, buried secrets, and a power struggle that would test the very foundations of the crown itself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the great hall of Astoria Palace as Princess Isabella Catherine Whitmore stood before the ornate mirror in her private chambers. Her reflection showed a woman of 28, with auburn hair carefully arranged in an elegant chignon and emerald eyes that held both determination and uncertainty. Today would change everything, not just for her, but for the entire kingdom of Astoria. Isabella adjusted the sapphire necklace that had belonged to her late mother, Queen Elena, feeling its familiar weight against her collarbone. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was wearing her mother's jewelry on the day she would announce her engagement to Prince Adrian of neighboring Valoria, a union that would strengthen both kingdoms but potentially destroy the delicate balance of power within her own family. Down the corridor, in the Queen Dowager's apartments, Duchess Vivian Ashford paced restlessly across Persian carpets that had witnessed 3 generations of royal drama. At 55, Vivian remained striking, her silver blonde hair swept back in a style that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and calculating blue eyes. She had been King Edmund's stepmother for nearly 30 years, having married his father when Edmund was just 18 and she an ambitious 25-year-old from minor nobility. Vivian paused at her window, watching the palace guards conduct their morning routine in the courtyard below. Each measured step, each synchronized movement reminded her of the careful choreography required to maintain power in a world where tradition meant everything and innovation was viewed with suspicion. She had spent decades perfecting that dance, and she wasn't about to let some romantic notion of love disrupt the plan she had carefully cultivated. The sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway caused Vivian to straighten, her expression shifting to one of practiced concern. She knew those footsteps belonged to Lady Catherine Morrison, Isabella's closest confidant and the one person in the palace who had never shown Vivian the deference she believed she deserved. Catherine knocked once before entering, her dark hair slightly disheveled from her morning ride through the palace grounds. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her position through loyalty and competence rather than birth or marriage. As Isabella's private secretary and trusted advisor, Catherine had access to information that made her both invaluable and dangerous. "Your Grace," Catherine said, offering a perfunctory curtsy that barely masked her distaste for the formality. "Princess Isabella requests your presence in the blue drawing room. The announcement ceremony begins in 2 hours." Vivian's smile was as cold as winter morning. "Of course, Lady Morrison. Though I must say, this engagement seems rather sudden. One might wonder what prompted such urgency." Catherine's expression remained neutral, though her hands tightened slightly on the folder she carried. "Love rarely follows a convenient schedule, Your Grace." "Love," Vivian repeated, the word carrying a note of disdain. "How charmingly naive. I suppose you believe this union is purely romantic?" "I believe Princess Isabella knows her own mind and heart," Catherine replied carefully. "She's had excellent guidance in understanding her duties to the crown." The subtle emphasis on excellent guidance wasn't lost on either woman. Catherine was referring to Queen Elena's influence, even years after her death, and both of them knew it. Queen Elena had been beloved by the people and respected by her peers, qualities that Vivian had always found inconvenient to her own ambitions. Meanwhile, in the blue drawing room, Isabella reviewed her speech one final time. The words felt heavy on her tongue, each phrase carefully crafted to present the engagement as a love match rather than the political alliance it truly was. She did care for Adrian, he was kind, intelligent, and shared her vision for progressive reforms within their respective kingdoms. But love? That remained to be seen. King Edmund entered quietly, his presence immediately commanding attention despite his soft-spoken nature. At 53, he bore the weight of his crown with dignity, though recent years had added silver to his dark hair and lines around his green eyes identical to his daughter's. The loss of his beloved wife Elena 6 years earlier had changed him, making him more cautious, more dependent on the counsel of others. "Isabella," he said warmly, crossing to embrace his daughter. "You look beautiful. Your mother would be proud." Isabella leaned into her father's embrace, drawing strength from his presence. "I hope I'm doing the right thing,"
Papa?" Edmund pulled back to study her face. "Do you have doubts about Prince Adrian?" "No, not about Adrian himself. He's a good man. It's just..." Isabella struggled to find words for the unease that had been growing within her. "I feel like there are undercurrents in this palace that I don't fully understand. Conversations that stop when I enter a room. Meetings that happen without my knowledge." Edmund's expression grew thoughtful. He had noticed the same things, the whispered conversations between certain courtiers, the way some of his advisors seemed to defer to Vivian's opinions more than his own. But, confronting it would mean acknowledging that his stepmother might be working against his daughter's interests, and that was a reality he wasn't ready to face. "The palace has always been full of gossip and intrigue," he said finally. "Your mother learned to navigate it with grace and wisdom. You will too." Before Isabella could respond, Lord Chancellor Marcus Blackwood announced the arrival of Prince Adrian and his entourage. Adrian entered the room with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to royal protocol, his dark hair perfectly styled and his military uniform immaculate. Behind him came his advisor, Sir Geoffrey Hartwell, and a small group of Valerian nobles. Isabella felt a genuine smile cross her face as Adrian approached. Whatever political motivations lay behind their engagement, she genuinely enjoyed his company. He was witty, well-read, and shared her passion for improving the lives of their subjects. If love didn't come naturally, perhaps it could grow from mutual respect and shared goals. "Princess Isabella," Adrian said, bowing formally before taking her hand and kissing it gently. "You look radiant." "Your Highness," Isabella replied, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I trust your journey was pleasant?" "Made infinitely better by its destination," Adrian said with a smile that reached his eyes. The genuine warmth between the couple wasn't lost on the assembled courtiers. Some looked pleased by the obvious affection between the future spouses, while others seemed less enthusiastic about the development. Vivian entered the room at that moment, her timing perfect as always. She was dressed in deep purple silk, a color that complemented her coloring while subtly asserting her continued importance within the royal hierarchy. Her entrance caused a brief lull in conversation as heads turned to acknowledge her presence. "Prince Adrian," Vivian said, offering a curtsy that was precisely calculated to show respect without subservience. "Welcome to Astoria. I trust you'll find our hospitality to your liking." Adrian inclined his head politely. "Duchess Vivian, your reputation for grace and wisdom precedes you." Vivian's smile sharpened slightly. "You're too kind, Your Highness. I do try to provide guidance where needed. The young can be so impulsive, don't you think? Important decisions require mature consideration." Isabella felt her jaw tighten at the thinly veiled criticism. Before she could respond, Catherine appeared at her elbow, a movement so smooth it seemed choreographed. "Your Highness," Catherine murmured to Adrian, "if I might steal Princess Isabella for a moment? There are some final preparations for the announcement ceremony." As Catherine guided Isabella away from the group, she spoke quietly. "The Duke of Westmere has arrived early. He's requesting a private audience before the ceremony." Isabella frowned. Duke Reginald of Westmere was one of the most powerful nobles in Astoria, controlling vast agricultural lands and commanding significant influence among the conservative faction of the nobility. His early arrival could signal either support for the engagement or opposition to it. "Did he say what he wanted to discuss?" Isabella asked. "No, but his demeanor suggests urgency." "Lady Sarah is with him." Lady Sarah Westmere was the Duke's daughter and had been prominently mentioned as a potential bride for Prince Adrian before Isabella's engagement was announced. Her presence added another layer of complexity to an already delicate situation. As they walked toward the Duke's temporary chambers, Isabella caught sight of Vivian engaged in intense conversation with Sir Geoffrey Hartwell, Adrian's advisor. Their body language suggested a familiarity that seemed odd given that this was supposedly their first meeting. Isabella made a mental note to ask Catherine to investigate that connection later. Duke Reginald was waiting in the Crimson Salon, his imposing figure standing near the fireplace. At 62, he remained physically commanding, with iron-gray hair and penetrating dark eyes that missed nothing.
Beside him stood Lady Sarah, a beautiful woman of 25 with golden hair and delicate features that had made her one of the most sought-after brides in the kingdom. "Your Highness," Duke Reginald said, bowing formally.
"Thank you for granting us this audience on such a momentous day." "Duke Reginald, Lady Sarah," Isabella replied, accepting Sarah's curtsy with a nod. "What brings you to seek private counsel?" The Duke exchanged a glance with his daughter before speaking. "I'll speak plainly, Your Highness. There are concerns among certain members of the nobility about this Valerian alliance. Not about Prince Adrian himself, by all accounts, he's an honorable man. But, the speed with which this engagement has been arranged, the lack of consultation with the noble council, it raises questions." Isabella felt her temper rise but kept her voice level. "Questions about what, exactly?"
"About who truly benefits from this alliance," Lady Sarah said quietly. "Valoria gains access to our trade routes and military support."
"What does Astoria gain beyond a romantic attachment?"
The implication was clear. They were suggesting that Isabella was allowing her heart to override her duty to the kingdom. It was an accusation that struck at the core of her deepest insecurities about the engagement. "Astoria gains a valuable alliance with a progressive nation that shares our values," Isabella replied firmly. "Prince Adrian and I have discussed extensive plans for reform that will benefit both kingdoms."
Duke Reginald nodded slowly. "I'm sure you have, Your Highness. But, forgive me for asking, are these reforms you've discussed together, or reforms that have been suggested to you by certain advisors?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella realized that Duke Reginald was suggesting that someone else was pulling the strings behind her engagement, using her feelings for Adrian to advance their own agenda. "I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions, Your Grace," Isabella said coolly. "I have no doubt of your capabilities," the Duke replied. "But, even the most capable rulers can be influenced by those they trust. Your step-grandmother, for instance, has been quite vocal about the benefits of this Valerian alliance." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. Vivian had indeed been supportive of the engagement, perhaps more supportive than Isabella would have expected given her usual cautious approach to foreign alliances. Could Vivian have her own reasons for promoting this marriage? Before Isabella could pursue that thought further, Catherine appeared in the doorway. "Your Highness, forgive the interruption, but the ceremony must begin in 30 minutes. The guests are arriving." Isabella nodded, grateful for the interruption while simultaneously frustrated by the questions Duke Reginald had raised. "We'll continue this conversation later, Your Grace. I value your counsel, even when it's difficult to hear." As Isabella left the room with Catherine, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap she didn't fully understand. The engagement announcement was supposed to be a celebration, but instead it felt like the opening move in a complex game where she wasn't sure who her allies were. Back in the blue drawing room, the atmosphere had grown more formal as additional nobles and dignitaries arrived. Isabella took her place beside Adrian, drawing comfort from his steady presence even as her mind raced with doubts and suspicions. Vivian positioned herself prominently among the gathered courtiers, her satisfied expression suggesting that everything was proceeding according to her plans. But, what exactly were those plans? And, how did they align with Isabella's own desires for her future and her kingdom? As the Lord Chancellor called for attention to begin the formal announcement ceremony, Isabella felt the weight of history pressing down upon her. Whatever happened next would shape not just her own destiny, but the future of Astoria itself. The question was whether she would be the author of that future or merely a pawn in someone else's design. The great clock in the tower chimed the hour, its resonant tones echoing through the palace corridors like a call to destiny. In moments, the engagement would be officially announced, setting in motion events that none of them could fully predict or control. Isabella took a deep breath and prepared to step into her future, whatever it might hold. The Lord Chancellor's voice resonated through the blue drawing room as he began the formal proceedings. "Lords and ladies of the realm, honored guests from the Kingdom of Valoria, His Majesty King Edmund requests your attention for a most joyous announcement." Isabella felt Adrian's subtle squeeze of her hand, a gesture of reassurance that helped steady her nerves. Around them, the assembled nobility maintained expressions of polite interest, though she could sense undercurrents of tension and speculation rippling through the crowd. King Edmund stepped forward,
his ceremonial crown catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. "It is with great joy and pride that I announce the engagement of my beloved daughter, Princess Isabella Catherine Whitmore, to His Royal Highness Prince Adrian of Valoria." The polite applause that followed felt somehow restrained, lacking the genuine enthusiasm one might expect for such happy news. Isabella noticed several exchanged glances among the courtiers, particularly between Vivian and a small group of nobles she didn't immediately recognize. Prince Adrian moved forward to address the assembly, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "Lords and ladies of Astoria, I am deeply honored to join my life with that of Princess Isabella, and, through this union, to strengthen the bonds between our two kingdoms. Together, we envision a future of prosperity, progress, and peace." As Adrian spoke about their shared vision for reform and modernization, Isabella watched the faces in the crowd more carefully. Duke Reginald's expression remained neutral but thoughtful. Lady Sarah stood beside her father, her beautiful face a mask of composure that revealed nothing of her inner thoughts. Several younger nobles seemed genuinely pleased by the announcement, while some of the older, more conservative members of the court appeared distinctly uncomfortable. But it was Vivian's reaction that troubled Isabella most. Her step-grandmother wore an expression of satisfaction that seemed almost predatory, as if this engagement was merely the first move in a larger game she was playing. After the formal announcement concluded, the gathering moved to the grand ballroom for the celebration reception. The massive room, with its soaring ceilings and gilt decorations, buzzed with conversation as guests mingled over champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. Isabella found herself separated from Adrian as various nobles approached to offer their congratulations and engage in the subtle political maneuvering that characterized all royal gatherings. She was speaking with the ambassador from the neighboring kingdom of Meridia when Catherine appeared at her side. "Your Highness," Catherine murmured discreetly, "might I have a word when you have a moment?" Isabella excused herself from the ambassador and followed Catherine to a relatively quiet alcove near one of the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. "What is it, Catherine?" Isabella asked, noting the worried expression on her friend's face. "I've been observing the reactions to your announcement," Catherine said quietly. "There's definitely a faction among the nobility that seems less than pleased. I overheard Duke Blackthorne speaking with Lord Ashworth about hasty decisions and foreign influence." Duke Blackthorne was one of the most conservative voices in the noble council, a man who viewed any change with suspicion and had never hidden his belief that women, even princesses, were too emotional to make sound political decisions. "More concerning," Catherine continued, "I noticed that Duchess Vivian seemed to know several members of Prince Adrian's entourage quite well. Too well for people meeting for the first time." Isabella felt a knot forming in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "I saw her speaking with Sir Geoffrey Hartwell as if they were old acquaintances. And there was something about their body language that suggested a long-standing relationship of some kind. Not romantic," Catherine added quickly, "but definitely conspiratorial." Before Isabella could respond, they were interrupted by the approach of Lady Margaret Thornfield, one of the Queen's former ladies-in-waiting who had remained close to the royal family after Queen Elena's death. "Isabella, my dear," Lady Margaret said warmly, though her eyes held a note of concern. "Congratulations on your engagement. Prince Adrian seems like a fine young man." "Thank you, Lady Margaret. I'm very happy." Lady Margaret glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard before speaking again. "I wonder if I might have a private word with you tomorrow? There are some matters concerning your dear mother that I think you should know about." Isabella felt her heart skip. Lady Margaret had been Queen Elena's closest confidant, the keeper of many royal secrets. If she wanted to discuss Queen Elena in connection with current events, it was likely important. "Of course, Lady Margaret. Shall we say 10 o'clock in the Rose Garden?" "Perfect, dear. Until tomorrow then, dot." As Lady Margaret melted back into the crowd, Catherine looked thoughtful. "The Queen's former ladies-in-waiting have been unusually quiet since your mother's death. If Lady Margaret is ready to speak now, it might be because she's concerned about current developments." Isabella nodded, filing that information away for later consideration. She was beginning to understand that her engagement had triggered reactions and revelations that went far beyond simple court gossip. Across the ballroom, Vivian was indeed engaged in intense conversation with Sir Geoffrey Hartwell and several other members of Prince Adrian's party. To the casual observer, it might have appeared as standard diplomatic courtesy, but Isabella could now see the familiarity that Catherine had noticed. "I need to speak with Adrian," Isabella said. "There are questions I need to ask." She made her way across the ballroom, accepting congratulations and making small talk while keeping her true destination in mind. Adrian was speaking with King Edmund and several Asturian nobles when she approached. "Might I steal my fiancé for a dance?" Isabella asked with what she hoped was a convincing smile. "Of course, my dear," King Edmund replied, looking pleased by the romantic gesture. As they moved onto the dance floor, Isabella waited for the music to provide cover for their conversation before speaking quietly. "Adrian, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer." Adrian's expression grew serious as he guided her through the steps of the waltz. "Of course. What's troubling you? How long have members of your party known Duchess Vivian? And please don't tell me they met for the first time today." Adrian was quiet for a moment, and Isabella could see him weighing his response carefully. "Sir Geoffrey has had occasional diplomatic contact with various members of the Asturian court over the years. It's part of his role as my foreign advisor." "Occasional diplomatic contact?" Isabella pressed. "Or something more substantial?" Adrian sighed. "Isabella, there are aspects of royal marriage negotiations that are complex. My father and I didn't pursue this alliance in isolation. There were conversations with certain members of your court about the possibility and mutual benefits." Isabella felt her stomach drop. "You mean this engagement was planned before you ever expressed interest in me personally?" "No," Adrian said firmly, his grip on her hand tightening. "My feelings for you are genuine, Isabella. But I'd be lying if I said the political groundwork hadn't been laid before I asked for your hand. That's how these things work in our world." Isabella appreciated his honesty, even as it confirmed her growing suspicions. "And Vivian was part of laying that groundwork?" "She may have indicated that such an alliance would be viewed favorably by certain factions within your court," Adrian admitted reluctantly. "But, Isabella, that doesn't diminish what we have or what we could build together." The music ended, but Isabella remained in Adrian's arms for a moment longer, processing what he'd told her. Her engagement wasn't just a romantic choice or even a political alliance, it was the culmination of behind-the-scenes maneuvering by people who had their own agendas. "I need some air," Isabella said suddenly. "Will you excuse me for a few minutes?" Adrian looked concerned but nodded. "Of course. Shall I come with you?" "No, I need to think. I'll return shortly." Isabella made her way through the crowd toward the ballroom's terrace doors, but before she could reach them, she was intercepted by Duke Reginald. "Your Highness," he said with a slight bow. "Might I accompany you? The evening air can be quite pleasant at this time of year." Realizing that Duke Reginald might have more information about the undercurrents she was beginning to sense, Isabella nodded. "Please do, Your Grace." They stepped onto the terrace together, the cool evening air a relief after the warmth of the crowded ballroom. The palace garden stretched before them, lit by torches that created pools of golden light among the carefully manicured pathways. "You seem troubled, Princess," Duke Reginald observed. "Having second thoughts about the engagement?" "Having questions about the circumstances surrounding it," Isabella replied carefully. Duke Reginald nodded as if he'd expected that response. "Questions are wise. Tell me, have you considered why Duchess Vivian has been so supportive of this particular alliance? I assume she believes it's beneficial for the kingdom." "Perhaps. Or perhaps she believes it's beneficial for herself." Duke Reginald paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Your Highness, there are things about your mother's death that the official reports didn't include. Things that might be relevant to your current situation." Isabella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What do you mean?" "Your mother was investigating certain financial irregularities in the months before she died. Irregularities that seem to center around some of the same noble families who are now most vocal in supporting your Valerian engagement."
Are you suggesting that my mother's death wasn't from natural causes?
Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm suggesting that your mother discovered something that made certain people very nervous. And that her sudden illness came at a remarkably convenient time for those people. Isabella felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Queen Elena's death had been attributed to a sudden fever that rapidly worsened into fatal complications. The royal physicians had been baffled by how quickly she declined, but there had been no suggestion of anything unnatural.
Do you have proof of these accusations? Isabella asked. Suspicions. Circumstantial evidence. And a growing concern that history might be about to repeat itself. Before Isabella could ask what he meant by that ominous statement, Catherine appeared on the terrace.
Your Highness, Catherine said, her voice tight with urgency.
King Edmund is asking for you. There's been an incident.
Isabella's heart raced as she followed Catherine back into the ballroom, Duke Reginald close behind. The festive atmosphere had been replaced by tense whispers and worried expressions. She found her father near the ballroom's entrance, speaking quietly with the captain of the guard.
Papa, what's happened? Isabella asked. King Edmund's face was grave. Prince Adrian has taken ill very suddenly. The royal physician is with him now.
Isabella felt the blood drain from her face.
How suddenly?
He complained of feeling dizzy about 10 minutes after you left for the terrace. Within moments, he was struggling to breathe and had to be carried to his chambers. Isabella looked around the ballroom and noticed that Vivian was nowhere to be seen.
Neither was Sir Geoffrey Hartwell or several other members of Adrian's party. Where is the Duchess? Isabella asked.
She went to her chambers when Prince Adrian fell ill, King Edmund replied.
Said she wasn't feeling well herself.
Isabella exchanged a meaningful glance with Catherine and Duke Reginald. The timing was too convenient, the pattern too familiar. If Duke Reginald was right about Queen Elena's death, then Adrian might be in mortal danger.
I need to see him, Isabella said firmly. The physician said no visitors until he's stabilized, King Edmund replied.
Then, I need to speak with the physician immediately, Isabella insisted.
And I want the palace sealed.
No one enters or leaves until we understand what happened. King Edmund looked surprised by his daughter's authoritative tone, but something in her expression convinced him to comply. Captain Morrison, see that the princess's orders are carried out. As the captain of the guard moved to implement the lockdown, Isabella turned to Catherine and Duke Reginald. We need to find Lady Margaret immediately. If she has information about my mother's death, I need to hear it now.
Catherine nodded grimly.
I'll locate her.
What about the Duchess?
Leave Vivian to me, Isabella said, her voice hardening with resolve.
It's time for some direct conversations.
As Isabella made her way toward Vivian's chambers, her mind raced with the implications of what was unfolding.
If her suspicions were correct, her engagement announcement hadn't been a celebration, it had been a trap.
And now Adrian was paying the price for whatever game was being played in the shadows of Astoria Palace. The corridors seemed longer and darker as Isabella walked toward what she now realized might be the most dangerous conversation of her life. Behind the polished facade of royal protocol and courtly manners, a deadly game was being played. And she was just beginning to understand that she wasn't a player, she was supposed to be a pawn. But pawns, Isabella thought grimly as she approached Vivian's door, could sometimes promote themselves to queens. And queens had the power to change the entire game. Isabella paused outside Vivian's chambers, her hand raised to knock, when she heard voices from within. Moving closer to the door, she could make out Vivian's voice along with at least two others, one she recognized as Sir Geoffrey Hartwell, and another that sounded like Lord Chancellor Marcus Blackwood.
Couldn't have waited until after the ceremony?
Vivian was saying, her usual composed tone replaced by something sharper and more urgent. The timing wasn't our choice, Sir Geoffrey replied. He was getting too suspicious, asking too many questions about the negotiations.
Questions that could lead him to discover our arrangements, came Lord Blackwood's voice.
We couldn't risk him backing out of the engagement or, worse, exposing our plans to Isabella. Isabella pressed herself closer to the door, her heart pounding as the implications of what she was hearing sank in.
They were talking about Adrian's sudden illness as if it had been deliberate.
The physician will attribute it to stress and rich food, Vivian continued. By tomorrow, he'll be recovered and the wedding plans can proceed without further complications.
And if he remembers what made him suspicious? Sir Geoffrey asked.
He won't, Lord Blackwood said with chilling confidence. The dosage was carefully calculated.
Memory confusion is a common side effect.
Isabella stepped back from the door, her mind reeling. They had drugged Adrian not to kill him, but to incapacitate him and impair his memory of whatever he had discovered.
But what could he have learned that made them so desperate to silence him?
She heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly ducked around the corner just as Sir Geoffrey emerged. He walked briskly down the corridor toward the guest wing, leaving Isabella to wonder what other conspirators might be scattered throughout the palace. Instead of confronting Vivian directly, Isabella decided to change tactics.
She needed more information before revealing what she knew.
Making her way quickly to Adrian's chambers, she found 2 guards posted outside and the royal physician just emerging. Dr. Whitmore, Isabella called softly, using his formal title to emphasize the gravity of the situation.
How is Prince Adrian?
Dr. Whitmore was a man in his 60s who had served the royal family faithfully for decades.
His weathered face showed concern as he approached Isabella.
Stable, Your Highness, but I'm puzzled by his symptoms. They appeared and resolved far too rapidly for any natural illness I'm familiar with.
What exactly happened to him? Isabella asked.
Rapid onset of dizziness, difficulty breathing, and disorientation. His pupils were dilated, and he complained of feeling disconnected from his surroundings. By the time I reached him, he could barely stand. Isabella felt her suspicions crystallizing.
Doctor, in your medical opinion, could these symptoms have been caused by something he ingested?
Dr. Whitmore studied her carefully.
It's possible.
The rapid onset and specific nature of the symptoms would be consistent with certain substances.
Why do you ask, Your Highness?
Because I believe someone deliberately poisoned him, Isabella said quietly. Not to kill him, but to incapacitate him and perhaps affect his memory.
The physician's expression grew grave.
That would explain the unusual presentation.
Princess, if you suspect poisoning, we should preserve any food or drink he consumed this evening for analysis.
Agreed.
Can you do that quietly, without alerting whoever might be responsible?
Of course. But, Your Highness, if someone is willing to poison a foreign prince, you yourself may be in danger.
Isabella nodded grimly. I'm beginning to realize that. How long before Adrian recovers?
If this was indeed a deliberate poisoning with a temporary agent, he should be lucid within a few hours.
However, there may be gaps in his memory from this evening. That's what they're counting on, Isabella thought. Thank you, Doctor. Please keep this conversation between us for now.
As Isabella left Adrian's chambers, she nearly collided with Catherine, who was hurrying down the corridor with Lady Margaret in tow. The older woman looked shaken, her usual composure replaced by visible anxiety. Lady Margaret, Isabella said warmly, though she could see the worry in the woman's eyes.
Thank you for coming so quickly. Princess, Catherine has told me about Prince Adrian's illness.
Combined with what I need to share with you about your mother, I fear we're facing something very serious. Isabella guided them to her private study, a smaller chamber adjacent to her bedroom where they could speak without fear of being overheard. Once the door was closed and locked, Lady Margaret sank into a chair as if the weight of her secrets had become too much to bear.
Where shall I begin?
Lady Margaret asked, her hands trembling slightly. With my mother, Isabella said gently.
What did you know about her illness that wasn't made public? Lady Margaret took a shuddering breath.
Your mother didn't die of a fever, Isabella. She died because she had uncovered evidence of embezzlement and treason within the royal court. Someone was systematically stealing from the royal treasury and using the funds to finance political destabilization efforts in neighboring kingdoms. Isabella felt the world tilting around her.
Treason? Against whom?
Against your father's rule, and, ultimately against you. The goal was to create enough instability to justify placing someone else on the throne, someone more malleable to certain interests.
Catherine leaned forward. Do you know who was involved?
I have some of your mother's private papers, Lady Margaret said, producing a small leather portfolio from her reticule.
She was building a case, documenting financial irregularities and suspicious correspondence.
She planned to present everything to the king, but she became ill before she could do so.
Isabella opened the portfolio with shaking hands.
The papers inside were in her mother's careful handwriting, documenting a complex web of financial manipulation and political conspiracy. Names jumped out at her: Lord Chancellor Blackwood, Duke Ashworth, and others she recognized as strong supporters of her engagement to Adrian. But it was the final name on the list that made her blood run cold: Vivian Ashford, Duchess and Queen Dowager.
Vivian was planning to overthrow my father? Isabella whispered.
Not overthrow, Lady Margaret corrected. Replace. Your mother discovered that Vivian had been working to arrange your marriage to someone who would be sympathetic to her agenda. With you married to a foreign prince and your father removed, Vivian would become regent over any future heirs. Isabella looked up sharply.
Removed how?
Lady Margaret's expression grew even more troubled. Your mother found evidence that they were slowly poisoning the king. Small doses of something that would gradually weaken him and eventually kill him, but slowly enough that it would appear to be natural aging and stress. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with terrifying clarity. And now they're trying to control Adrian, to ensure that when I marry him, he'll be a puppet ruler rather than an independent ally.
That would be my assumption, Lady Margaret said. Whatever Prince Adrian discovered tonight threatened their plans, so they had to silence him temporarily. Catherine had been studying the papers over Isabella's shoulder.
Look at this, she said, pointing to a particular page. Your mother documented a pattern of similar incidents in other kingdoms.
This isn't the first time they've used this strategy.
Isabella read the passage Catherine indicated, her horror growing with each line. Queen Elena had discovered that Vivian and her conspirators had successfully destabilized at least 3 other royal houses over the past decade, always using the same methods: strategic marriages, gradual poisoning of inconvenient rulers, and manipulation of succession laws. They're not just traitors, Isabella said quietly. They're professional regicides. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation.
Isabella quickly gathered the papers while Catherine moved to answer. Who is it?
Catherine called. Sir William Hartwell, came the reply. I have an urgent message for Princess Isabella from Prince Adrian. Isabella felt her blood run cold. Sir Geoffrey Hartwell was part of the conspiracy, but Sir William was his younger brother and Adrian's personal secretary.
Could he be trusted, or was this another trap? Catherine looked to Isabella questioningly.
Isabella made a quick decision based on what she remembered of Sir William. He was younger, more idealistic, and had always seemed genuinely devoted to Adrian rather than to political maneuvering. Let him in, Isabella said, but be ready for anything. Catherine unlocked the door to admit a young man who looked remarkably like Sir Geoffrey but with softer features and anxious eyes. Sir William entered quickly, glancing around nervously before speaking.
Princess Isabella, I don't have much time. Prince Adrian asked me to find you before he lost consciousness completely.
He said to tell you that he overheard a conversation between my brother and Lord Blackwood. They were discussing something called the Meridia arrangement and how it could be applied here in Astoria. Isabella exchanged glances with Lady Margaret, who had gone pale.
Did he say anything else? Isabella asked.
He said to tell you not to trust the wine at tomorrow's official ceremony, and that you should look in his travel writing desk for papers he's been keeping secret from his own advisors.
Sir William, Isabella said carefully, do you know what the Meridia arrangement refers to?
The young man shook his head. No, but, from the way they were talking about it, it wasn't something good.
Princess, is Prince Adrian going to be all right? The way he collapsed, it wasn't natural. Isabella made another quick decision. If Sir William was genuinely loyal to Adrian, she might need him as an ally.
Sir William, I believe your brother and others have been drugging Prince Adrian to keep him compliant with their plans.
Are you willing to help us uncover the truth?
Sir William's face flushed with anger.
I knew something was wrong.
Geoffrey's been acting strangely for months, taking meetings with people who shouldn't be involved in diplomatic affairs.
Yes, Your Highness, I'll help however I can. Good. First, I need you to go to Adrian's chambers and retrieve whatever papers he mentioned. Can you do that without arousing suspicion?
I think so. I have access to his rooms, and the guards know me. Be very careful, Catherine warned.
If they realize Adrian recovered enough to send you a message, they might escalate their plans.
After Sir William left on his mission, Isabella turned back to Lady Margaret.
Tell me about the Meridia arrangement. I assume from your reaction that you know what it refers to. Lady Margaret nodded grimly.
3 years ago, Princess Celeste of Meridia died in a riding accident 6 months after her marriage to a foreign prince. The prince became regent over her infant sister and has been systematically dismantling Meridia's traditional government ever since.
If that's their template. Isabella didn't need her to finish.
The implication was clear: they planned for Isabella to meet an untimely end after her marriage, leaving Adrian as regent over Astoria and under the control of Vivian's faction.
We need to warn my father, Isabella said. Do we? Catherine asked quietly. Think about it, Isabella.
If they've been slowly poisoning him as Lady Margaret suggests, his judgment may already be compromised.
And who knows how many of his advisors are involved in this conspiracy?
Isabella sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what they were facing. Her engagement party had become the focal point of a plot that went far beyond simple palace intrigue. This was about the future of her kingdom, and possibly her life. What do we do? She asked, feeling younger and more uncertain than she had in years. Lady Margaret reached over and took her hand.
We do what your mother would have done. We gather evidence, identify our allies, and we fight back. But we have to be very careful about who we trust. Starting with Adrian, Isabella said. If he recovers enough to think clearly, he might be our strongest ally. His own life is at stake now too. Catherine moved to the window, peering out at the palace grounds. The question is, how much time do we have? If they realize that Adrian remembers what he overheard, or that we're investigating, they might decide to accelerate their timeline. Isabella felt a chill as she realized what Catherine meant. If the conspirators felt cornered, they might decide that Isabella and Adrian were too dangerous to leave alive. The engagement celebration could become a funeral very quickly. Then, we need to move fast, Isabella said, her voice hardening with determination. Catherine, can you discreetly identify which guards we can trust? Lady Margaret, I need you to reach out to any other ladies-in-waiting or court members who were loyal to my mother. We need to build a network of allies before tomorrow's ceremony. As the two women nodded and prepared to leave, Isabella added one final instruction. And if Sir William doesn't return within the hour, we have to assume he's been discovered. In that case, we move to immediate emergency protocols. After they left, Isabella sat alone in her study, staring at her mother's papers and trying to process the magnitude of what she had learned. Her entire life had been shaped by lies and manipulation. Her mother's death, her father's declining health, her engagement to Adrian, all of it had been orchestrated by people she had trusted. But now she knew the truth. And knowledge, as her mother had always told her, was power. The question was whether she could use that power effectively before it was too late. Outside her window, the palace grounds were quiet under the starlight. But Isabella knew that beneath the peaceful facade, dangerous forces were moving. Tomorrow would bring either triumph or tragedy. She intended to make sure it was triumph. Sir William returned within the hour, but he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by Captain Thomas Morrison, Catherine's older brother and the head of the Royal Guard. Isabella's heart raced as she wondered if their conspiracy had been discovered, but the expression on Captain Morrison's face suggested urgency rather than hostility. Princess Isabella, Captain Morrison said with a formal bow, Sir William has shared some disturbing information with me. With your permission, I'd like to present some additional evidence that may be relevant to your current situation. Isabella studied the captain carefully.
Thomas Morrison had served the crown faithfully for over 15 years, and his loyalty to the royal family had never been questioned. More importantly, he had been one of Queen Elena's most trusted guardians. "Please, speak freely, Captain," Isabella said, gesturing for both men to sit. Captain Morrison glanced at Sir William before continuing.
"Sir William informed me of Prince Adrian's suspicions about poisoning and potential threats to the royal family.
This concerns me greatly because I've been conducting my own quiet investigation into irregularities I've noticed over the past several months."
"What kind of irregularities?" Isabella asked.
"Changes in guard rotations that weren't authorized by me, new personnel being assigned to sensitive positions without proper vetting, and, most troubling, several instances where I found evidence of people accessing areas of the palace they had no business being in."
Sir William leaned forward. "Captain Morrison also helped me retrieve Prince Adrian's papers. Your Highness, what we found is extensive."
He produced a leather satchel that appeared to contain dozens of documents. Isabella opened it carefully, revealing correspondence, financial records, and what appeared to be intelligence reports from multiple kingdoms. "Adrian has been conducting his own investigation," Sir William explained. He became suspicious about the circumstances surrounding this engagement when he realized how easily everything had fallen into place. He started researching the political situations in kingdoms where similar alliances had been arranged. Isabella began reading through the papers, her horror growing with each page. Adrian had documented a pattern of political manipulation that stretched across multiple royal houses throughout the continent. In each case, a strategic marriage had been arranged, followed by the convenient death or incapacitation of key royal family members, resulting in power being consolidated under regents who were sympathetic to a shadowy network of nobles and financiers.
"The Meridia arrangement wasn't an isolated incident," Isabella said, looking up from the papers. "It's part of a systematic campaign to destabilize traditional monarchies." Captain Morrison nodded grimly. "And, according to Prince Adrian's research, the same key players have been involved in each case,
including several members of our own court." Isabella found a detailed analysis in Adrian's handwriting that made her blood run cold. He had identified Vivian as a central figure in this network, someone who had been placed in various royal courts through strategic marriages and had used her positions to facilitate the broader conspiracy. Vivian's first marriage, Isabella read aloud from Adrian's notes, was to Lord Ashford, a minor noble who suddenly rose to prominence after their union. When he died in a hunting accident 3 years later, she married my grandfather when he was recently widowed and vulnerable.
She's been working from within Astoria ever since.
Sir William pulled out another set of documents.
Prince Adrian also discovered financial records showing that large sums of money have been moving through accounts controlled by this network. They're not just seeking political power, they're profiting from the chaos they create. "How?" Isabella asked. Captain Morrison answered.
"By destabilizing kingdoms, they create opportunities for certain merchants and financiers to profit from war, reconstruction contracts, and favorable trade agreements. It's a business model built on manufactured crises." Isabella felt sick as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about Astoria or even about royal succession, it was about a systematic plan to reshape the political landscape of the entire continent for financial gain. "There's more," Sir William said quietly. "Prince Adrian found evidence that they'd been accelerating their timeline because several kingdoms have started to become suspicious. There have been quiet investigations beginning in at least 3 other royal courts. Which means they need to complete their takeover of Astoria quickly, before the broader conspiracy is exposed," Isabella concluded. Captain Morrison stood and moved to the window, checking the grounds below before speaking again. "Princess, I believe we're facing an immediate threat. If they know that Prince Adrian was investigating, and if they suspect you're becoming aware of the situation, they may decide to act tonight rather than wait for tomorrow's ceremony." As if summoned by his words, Catherine appeared at the door, moving quickly and quietly. "Isabella," she said urgently, "we have a problem. I've been monitoring movements throughout the palace, and there are several guards I don't recognize patrolling areas they shouldn't be in. More concerning, I saw Lord Blackwood and Duke Ashworth entering the king's chambers about 20 minutes ago.
Isabella's heart raced. Are they? I don't know, Catherine interrupted.
But it's nearly midnight, and there's no legitimate reason for them to be meeting with your father at this hour.
Captain Morrison was already moving toward the door.
Princess, I need to check on the king immediately.
Sir William, can you return to Prince Adrian and ensure he's protected?
Take 2 of my most trusted guards with you.
What about me? Isabella asked.
You need to stay safe, Captain Morrison replied.
If our suspicions are correct, you're the primary target.
They need you alive long enough to marry Prince Adrian and legitimize their eventual regency, but after that.
He didn't need to finish the sentence.
Isabella understood that her life expectancy was measured in hours rather than years if the conspiracy succeeded. No, Isabella said firmly. I'm not hiding while my father and Adrian are in danger. We need to gather our allies and confront this directly.
Catherine looked conflicted.
Isabella, if they realize you know about their plans, they might abandon their subtle approach and resort to more direct methods.
They're already using direct methods, Isabella pointed out. They poison Adrian tonight and may be threatening my father right now. Hiding won't change that.
Sir William spoke up. Princess, if I may suggest, Prince Adrian was conscious enough when I left him to give coherent instructions. If we can get him mobile, he could provide valuable support.
He has loyal men among his entourage who aren't part of the conspiracy. Isabella made her decision.
Captain Morrison, take half your most trusted guards and secure my father.
Make sure those guards in his chambers are legitimate, and if they're not, arrest them.
Sir William, help Adrian get to his loyal men and have them secure the Valerian delegation. Catherine and I will gather the evidence we need to expose this conspiracy publicly. Princess, Captain Morrison protested, that's too dangerous. Everything is dangerous now. Isabella cut him off.
But we can't fight this conspiracy by hiding from it. We need to take the initiative.
As the group prepared to split up, Catherine pulled Isabella aside.
Are you sure about this approach? Once we move openly, there's no going back to subtle maneuvering. Isabella looked at her dearest friend, seeing both loyalty and concern in her eyes. Catherine, my mother tried to handle this quietly and discreetly.
She's dead because of it.
I won't make the same mistake. Catherine nodded, understanding the determination in Isabella's voice. Then, what do you need me to do?
Help me gather Lady Margaret and any other ladies in waiting we can trust. We're going to Lady Margaret's chambers to collect all of my mother's evidence, and then, we're going to the Great Hall.
The Great Hall? Why? Isabella's expression hardened with resolve. Because that's where the Noble Council meets, and I'm going to call an emergency session.
By dawn, every noble in this kingdom is going to know exactly what Vivian and her conspirators have been doing. As they prepared to leave Isabella's study, Captain Morrison handed her a small knife in a concealed sheath. Just in case, he said quietly. Princess, your mother would be proud of your courage. Isabella accepted the weapon, hoping she wouldn't need to use it but grateful for the protection it represented.
Let's hope she'll also be proud of our success. The group dispersed, each heading toward their assigned tasks.
Isabella and Catherine moved carefully through the corridors, avoiding the main pathways and using servants' passages that Isabella had explored as a child. The palace felt different in the darkness. Every shadow could hide a threat, every sound could signal discovery. They reached Lady Margaret's chambers without incident, finding the older woman waiting for them with a larger collection of Queen Elena's papers and several other ladies in waiting who had served during Elena's reign.
Princess, Lady Margaret said quietly, we've been expecting you.
Word has spread among those of us who remember your mother.
We're ready to support you however we can.
Isabella looked around at the assembled women, Lady Margaret, Lady Sarah Pemberton, Lady Anne Hastings, and Lady Dorothy Fairfax. These were women who had served her mother faithfully and who had remained silent for years about what they had witnessed. Now, finally, they were ready to speak. Ladies, Isabella said formally, I'm asking you to risk your lives and your positions to help me expose a conspiracy that threatens not just Astoria, but potentially the stability of multiple kingdoms.
Are you willing to stand with me?
Lady Anne Hastings, a stern woman in her 60s who had served as Queen Elena's head lady-in-waiting, spoke for the group. Princess, we failed to protect your mother when she needed us most.
We will not fail to protect her kingdom and her daughter. Isabella felt a surge of emotion at the loyalty and determination in the woman's voice. For the first time since learning about the conspiracy, she felt like she might actually have a chance of success.
Then, let's gather everything we need and make our way to the Great Hall, Isabella said. By morning, Vivian and her conspirators will either be in custody or we'll all be dead. But, either way, the truth will be known. As the group prepared to move, Catherine checked the corridor one final time before signaling that it was safe to proceed. Isabella took a deep breath, knowing that the next few hours would determine not just her own fate, but the future of her kingdom. The game that had been played in shadows for years was finally being brought into the light. And Isabella intended to make sure that when dawn broke over Astoria Palace, it would illuminate a kingdom free from the corruption that had killed her mother and threatened her own life. The final confrontation was about to begin. The Great Hall of Astoria Palace had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies, state dinners, and important declarations. But, as Isabella and her loyal supporters prepared to expose the conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of the kingdom, the ancient chamber felt charged with a tension unlike anything in its long history. Isabella stood at the head of the massive oak table where the noble council convened, surrounded by the evidence that would either save or damn them all. Lady Margaret and the other ladies-in-waiting had arranged Queen Elena's papers methodically, while Catherine had set up Adrian's research documents alongside them. The weight of truth filled the room like a physical presence. Captain Morrison arrived first, his expression grim but determined. "Princess," he reported quietly, "your father is safe." The guards in his chambers were legitimate, but Lord Blackwood and Duke Ashworth were indeed meeting with him.
They claimed to be discussing security concerns for tomorrow's ceremony. "Did you detain them?" Isabella asked. "Not yet. I wanted to await your orders.
However, I did station trusted guards at all entrances to the king's chambers. No one enters or leaves without my knowledge." Before Isabella could respond, Sir William entered the hall supporting a pale but alert Prince Adrian. Despite his obvious weakness from the evening's poisoning, Adrian's eyes were clear and focused. "Isabella," Adrian said, moving carefully to her side, "Sir William has told me what you've discovered. I'm sorry I didn't share my suspicions with you earlier. I was trying to protect you from information that could put you in danger." Isabella took his hands, feeling the tremor that remained from whatever drug he'd been given. "We protect each other now," she said firmly.
"Are your loyal men in position?" Adrian nodded.
Sir William coordinated with Captain Morrison. "We have control of the guest wing, and my most trusted guards are securing the evidence we gathered. Geoffrey and his conspirators are confined to their quarters."
"How did you manage that without alerting the broader conspiracy?" Catherine asked. Sir William answered.
"We told them Prince Adrian had suffered a relapse and needed absolute quiet.
Anyone attempting to visit him is being turned away for medical reasons."
The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors outside the Great Hall. Isabella tensed, but Captain Morrison held up a reassuring hand. "Lady Sarah Westmere," he announced.
"She requested to see you, Princess. Says she has information that can't wait."
Isabella remembered her conversation with Duke Reginald and his daughter from earlier in the evening.
"Send her in."
Lady Sarah entered the hall looking disheveled and frightened, a stark contrast to her composed appearance at the engagement celebration. She was accompanied by her father, Duke Reginald, whose stern expression had been replaced by one of urgent concern. "Princess Isabella," Sarah said, offering a hasty curtsy, "forgive the intrusion, but we've discovered something that changes everything." Duke Reginald stepped forward, producing a set of documents from his coat. "After our conversation on the terrace, I couldn't shake my concerns about the timing of your engagement. I ordered a discreet investigation into recent financial transactions involving certain members of the court." Isabella gestured for them to approach the table. "What did you find?"
Evidence of payments, Duke Reginald said, spreading the papers on the table.
Large sums of money transferred from accounts controlled by foreign interests to several Asturian nobles. The timing corresponds with major political events, including your mother's death and your engagement announcement. Lady Sarah's voice was tight with emotion as she continued.
More troubling, we found correspondence between my own cousin, Lord Ashworth, and representatives of something called the Continental Stability Initiative. It's not a government organization, it's a private consortium of merchants and financiers. Adrian looked up sharply from the documents he was studying.
The Continental Stability Initiative is mentioned in my research. They present themselves as promoting peace and economic cooperation, but they're actually destabilizing governments to create profitable opportunities for reconstruction and resource extraction. Isabella felt the pieces clicking into place with terrifying clarity.
They're not just trying to control Astoria.
They're trying to create a network of puppet governments across the continent.
Precisely, Duke Reginald confirmed.
And, from what we've uncovered tonight, Astoria was intended to be one of their crown jewels, a central kingdom that could influence trade routes and military alliances throughout the region. Captain Morrison had been reviewing the financial documents while listening to the conversation.
Princess, these payment records show that the conspiracy has been operating for over a decade. The amounts involved are staggering.
Isabella studied the papers, seeing her kingdom's recent history in a new and horrifying light. Every major political development, every unexpected death or illness, every strategic marriage, all of it had been orchestrated by people who saw nations as nothing more than business opportunities.
We need to move quickly, Isabella said. If Vivian and her conspirators realize their plans have been exposed, they'll either flee or attempt to accelerate their timeline.
As if summoned by her words, the great doors to the hall swung open with a resonant boom.
Vivian entered, flanked by Lord Chancellor Blackwood and several guards that Isabella didn't recognize.
The Duchess was still elegantly dressed despite the late hour, but her usual composure had been replaced by cold determination.
Princess Isabella, Vivian said, her voice carrying across the hall with aristocratic authority. I understand you've been having some very interesting conversations this evening.
Isabella straightened, feeling the weight of the moment settling around her.
Vivian. How convenient of you to join us. We were just discussing your business arrangements.
Vivian's smile was sharp as winter ice. My business arrangements, as you put it, have been for the betterment of this kingdom. Your father has proven inadequate to the challenges of modern governance.
Inadequate or inconvenient to your plans? Adrian asked, stepping closer to Isabella in a show of solidarity.
Lord Blackwood spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the formal tone he used in official proceedings.
Prince Adrian, your illness this evening was regrettable but necessary.
You were asking questions that could have disrupted delicate negotiations.
Negotiations?
Captain Morrison's hand moved subtly toward his sword.
Is that what you call treason and murder?
Vivian's expression didn't change, but Isabella noticed that the guards flanking her had positioned themselves strategically around the hall. Such dramatic language, Captain.
We prefer to think of it as political evolution.
The old ways of governing are obsolete. Hereditary monarchy is a relic that serves no one's interests.
Isabella felt a surge of anger that cut through her fear. It served my mother's interests to protect this kingdom from people like you. That's why you killed her.
For the first time, Vivian's composure cracked slightly. Your mother was an idealistic fool who couldn't see beyond outdated notions of honor and duty. She would have led this kingdom to ruin rather than embrace necessary change. Lady Margaret stepped forward, her voice shaking with emotion.
Queen Elena died because she discovered your embezzlement and your plans to overthrow the rightful government.
We have her papers, her evidence, her documentation of every crime you committed. Vivian's gaze swept over the assembled group, taking in the papers spread across the council table and the determined expressions on every face. Evidence, she said dismissively. Collected by a dying woman and a group of sentimental ladies in waiting.
Do you really think such things matter when weighed against the reality of power?
Lord Blackwood gestured to the guards, who began moving closer to Isabella's group. Princess, your romantic attachment to outdated traditions is understandable but, ultimately irrelevant. You will marry Prince Adrian as planned, and, together you will serve as the public face of a more efficient form of government.
Efficient for whom? Adrian demanded. For the Continental Stability Initiative? For the financiers who profit from the chaos you create? Vivian's eyes narrowed.
You've been remarkably thorough in your research, Prince Adrian.
Unfortunately, that thoroughness has made you a liability.
The tension in the hall reached a breaking point as the guards moved closer. Isabella could feel the moment balancing on a knife's edge. They had the evidence to expose the conspiracy, but Vivian and her allies still controlled significant resources within the palace. Then, Captain Morrison made a subtle hand signal, and the hall side entrances opened to reveal additional guards, ones Isabella recognized as genuinely loyal to the crown rather than to the conspiracy. Duchess Vivian, Captain Morrison said formally, by the authority vested in me as captain of the Royal Guard, and, on the order of Princess Isabella, acting in defense of the crown, I place you under arrest for treason, murder, and conspiracy against the Kingdom of Astoria. Vivian's facade of control finally shattered.
You fool! Do you think arresting me will end this?
The Continental Stability Initiative has resources you can't imagine. They will simply find another way to achieve their goals. Perhaps, Isabella said, stepping forward with newfound confidence.
But, they'll have to do it without Astoria's cooperation.
And, more importantly, they'll have to do it while being publicly exposed across every kingdom where they've been operating. Adrian moved to stand beside Isabella, his voice carrying despite his earlier weakness.
The evidence we've gathered tonight implicates conspirators in at least 6 kingdoms.
By tomorrow, every royal court on the continent will know about the Continental Stability Initiative and their methods.
Duke Reginald added his voice to the proclamation.
The financial records we've obtained will be shared with banking authorities throughout the region. Their funding sources will be exposed and frozen. Isabella watched as the reality of their situation dawned on Vivian and Lord Blackwood. Their carefully constructed conspiracy was crumbling, not because they had been outmaneuvered in the shadows, but because their victims had chosen to bring everything into the light. Guards, Captain Morrison commanded, escort the Duchess and Lord Blackwood to the tower cells. They will await trial for their crimes against the crown. As Vivian was led away, she turned back to Isabella with one final venomous look. You think you've won, child? You've merely delayed the inevitable. The world is changing, whether you embrace it or not. Isabella met her step-grandmother's gaze without flinching. The world is changing, Vivian. But, it will change in the direction of justice, not greed. After the conspirators were removed, the hall fell quiet except for the soft rustling of papers and the distant sounds of guards securing other members of the conspiracy throughout the palace. Isabella sank into a chair, suddenly, exhausted by the emotional toll of the evening's revelations and confrontations. Adrian took the seat beside her, reaching for her hand.
Isabella, I need to ask you something important. After everything that's happened, after learning how our engagement was manipulated, do you still want to marry me?
Isabella looked at the man beside her, the man who had risked his own safety to investigate the conspiracy that threatened her kingdom, who had chosen to stand with her against overwhelming odds despite barely knowing her. She thought about the political alliance that had brought them together and the genuine partnership they had forged through crisis. Adrian, she said quietly, our engagement may have begun as political manipulation, but what we've built tonight, the trust, the mutual support, the shared commitment to justice, that's real. If you're willing to build a marriage on that foundation, then, yes, I want to marry you.
Adrian's smile was the first genuinely happy expression Isabella had seen all evening.
I can think of no better foundation for a royal marriage than mutual respect and shared purpose. Lady Margaret approached the table, carrying a fresh set of documents. Princess, we have work to do.
Exposing this conspiracy is only the beginning. We need to root out all of their allies, restore proper governance to the kingdom, and help the other affected nations do the same. Isabella stood, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, not as a burden this time, but as a purpose. Then, we begin immediately. Catherine, I need you to coordinate with the other kingdoms' intelligence services. Duke Reginald, can you work with the banking authorities to trace the financial networks?
As assignments were distributed and plans made, Isabella realized that her engagement party had indeed changed everything, just not in the way anyone had anticipated. Instead of marking the beginning of her submission to others' plans, it had become the catalyst for her emergence as a true leader. The sun was beginning to rise over Astoria Palace, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that seemed to promise a brighter future. Isabella stood at the great windows of the hall, watching the dawn break over her kingdom, with Adrian beside her and their allies preparing to build something better from the ashes of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed them all. The crown's shadow had lifted, revealing the light of truth and justice beneath. And, in that light, Isabella could see the foundation of a new era, one built on transparency, accountability, and the genuine partnership between kingdoms that could accomplish together what none could achieve alone. The game of shadows was over. The work of building a better future had just begun.